Book came out 2018 with co-author Kevin Simler. I have another book that came out a bit before that on a completely different topic, but it's available for perusal here. Our book was classified as psychology, and it was reviewed and refereed by psychologists, and psychologists have said the basic thesis is well known. It's not original, it's well accepted. We think the novel thing about our book is that the policy world has not understood this basic claim that psychologists have understood. And so that will be the key point we're trying to make here. Policy people haven't accepted a key point that psychologists understand. I started out my career in physics, and then I moved to computer science. And in those worlds, I learned that the world is eager for innovation. If you can find a better way to arrange physical devices or computer software, a lot of people will pay a lot of money for that. When I first saw social science, I saw that there were a lot of social innovations that seemed possible that were powerful and simple compared to the ones we struggled to find in the other areas. That excited me, and so I went into social science. And then in social science, I learned that the world is not very interested or eager for social science innovations. And that's long been a puzzle. Why does the world pay so much for physics and computer innovations and so little for social innovations? The reason why it was so easy to find what seemed like powerful social innovations is because they've been sitting there available for many, many decades without anybody actually using them. So our explanation for this puzzle, described in this book, which is what I wish I would have known at the beginning of my career to help me direct my efforts better, is that we're wrong about the motivations in these analyses. So let me explain what I mean by that. Chimpanzees and other primates spend a lot of time grooming each other. That is, they sit and they pick bugs and dirt out of the fur of their colleagues. Why do they do this? A human looking at this would be tempted to say, they're being nice and helpful. But primates groom a larger fraction of their day, not when their world is more dirty or has more bugs or they have bigger backs. They groom more when they have larger social groups. Apparently, grooming is a social activity that's intended to cement political alliances. They groom their friends, and their friends groom them, and that makes them bond with each other. That's what the chimpanzees are actually doing, even though we would be tempted to call that helping. On the right is a bird. There's a bird called the babbler bird that's been studied, which hangs out in small groups near bushes. And some of those birds hang out at the top of the bush looking out for predators. And if a predator is seen, they will yell to the rest of the group to warn them about it. And then they're taking a personal risk in doing this. These same birds who will be at the top of these branches are often seen giving food to the other birds. Again, to humans, we would say they're helping. What nice birds. But what actually goes on is these birds will shove food down the throat of the other bird who doesn't want to take it, and they will fight to be on the top branch of the bush. They are fighting over status, and the higher status birds win in many ways in these social groups. It looks like they're helping, but it's really not. Now, these animals aren't fooled by their behavior. They don't have a different theory of their behavior like we might have a theory of our behavior, but it suggests that we might be wrong about how we'd interpret other behavior that we'd see in our world. For example, a famous set of split brain experiments had patients whose two halves of their brain had been separated. In this way, they could talk to one half of the brain and see that brain, half of the brain, do something with the half of the body it controls, and then they could ask the other half of the brain, which controls their mouth, why did you do that? For example, they might tell one half of the brain, stand up. And then they would ask the other half, why did you stand up? And they might say, I wanted to get a Coke. They made up a reason. They didn't know what the other half of the brain was saying, so they made up a reason. So that's the kind of creature you are. You are built to be ready to have an explanation for things you do, even when you don't know what you do. You don't say the true answer, which is, I don't know. You're talking to the other half of my brain. You make up a reason. That also suggests you might be often wrong about your motives. Finally, consider this classic scene in life, perhaps, and literature: two lovers at a restaurant having a nice romantic meal. If you ask an actor to play this scene, they will tell you this is a very hard scene to play if all's going on is these two people are happily having a dinner together. That doesn't work. An actor needs to see multiple levels of motivation in order to find their motivation and realistically project this scene on a stage or screen. That is, we as viewers and actors expect there typically to be multiple levels of motivation in any important activity like this. Like, I'm afraid you're going to leave me, so I'm trying to keep you from leaving me. I'm being especially nice for that. Or, I'm planning on leaving you, but I'm feeling guilty about it, and I'm trying to let you off nicely, so I'm trying to be nice to you. If I have those motivations, I can act this scene and find my motives and be believable. So these all suggest that people might often be mistaken about their motivations. However, that abstract idea isn't enough to convince you that you are actually wrong about a lot of your motivations. That's just a possibility. To convince you you're actually wrong, what our book does, and I will do in this lecture, is go over 10 areas of life, and in each area, try to explain to you how your motivations are different than you think. So let's start with the first, laughter. You all laugh. We all laugh. We like to laugh. Why do we laugh? If you ask someone why they laugh, they tend to come up with explanations like, because it was funny, which doesn't really mean that much. Other people have come up with other sort of odd theories. But we actually understand relatively well why people laugh. It's a we're still playing signal. Most animals have a play mode where instead of doing serious things, they play act. So they might play fight and play chase. And in play mode, they do stylized versions of these things with their claws withdrawn, and in a way to make it clear we're pretending. We're not actually fighting or actually chasing. And sometimes when they're playing, one of them actually gets hurt. And at that point, they need to notice that and suddenly switch out of play mode into a more serious mode. This happens for humans too. We play, but sometimes we really hurt each other, and then we stop playing. Much of our play is social because we're social creatures. We play at being friendly, we play at violating rules, we might play insult each other. And as a result, we need a we're still playing signal to say, no, I'm not hurt, it's okay. And this helps explain a number of the puzzling features that we see in laughter that aren't explained by the theory that it's because we're funny. For example, less than 20% of the time are we laughing is at anything like a joke. We laugh far more often when we're around other people than we're by ourselves. A speaker will laugh more often than the listeners. And we often laugh about things that would seem quite cruel if we weren't doing it in a laughing mode. So we might laugh at the joke, don't drop the soap in the prison's shower. Why? You might get raped. Isn't that funny? Apparently it is. But why? It's we're still playing. I'm not in prison, you're not in prison. We know that someone might be offended and hurt by this joke, but it's not you or me. And we laugh to show we feel safe, we're still playing. Which makes sense. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to be doing, although you realize it's odd that we aren't aware of this. Why don't we know that this is what we're doing? So there's going to be a general pattern over all these 10 areas. In each area, first we're going to identify the usual standard motive people would most often say in public. Then we're going to identify some puzzles that don't make as much sense from that point of view. Then we will suggest an alternative hidden motive that makes more sense of the details of the behavior in that area of life. And all along we're going to wonder, why don't we know? Why don't we admit? Each of the things we're actually doing, our real plausible motives, are perfectly reasonable things to be doing, often quite helpful and nice things to be doing. But we deny it or are unaware. Also to notice here, I have to be brief in each of these areas. I can't be that thorough. I will focus on causes in terms of a ultimate cause. So at any one time when you do something, you have some thoughts in your head, and then there's some nearby circumstances that induce that. I'm not focused on those thoughts in your head or the nearby circumstance. I'm focused on the larger forces, social forces, evolutionary forces, that produced that kind of behavior, that shaped the details of that behavior to make it exist and take the forms it does. Almost all areas of life have many relevant motives. Most everything you do for many reasons. I can't be talking about the motive in an area. I have to be talking about the main motive, the strongest motive. There will always be others. All of you vary from topic to topic and person to person in how aware you are about these things. For some of the things I will tell you, like perhaps laughter, you will say, of course, I always knew that. For others, you will be shocked and outraged that I would dare suggest that the usual motive you would give isn't the usual one. Those tend to be areas you consider more sacred and precious to you. Sorry about that. And I'm not trying to convince you of all 10 of these areas. If I get 7 or 8 of them, I'll be okay. Then the main message is there are a lot of hidden motives all through life. And the fact that there are that many of them in the sample of 10 should at least make you more wonder if the other areas are different than you think. That's my plan here. So now we're just going to go through the other 9 areas. Body language. Why do you sit or stand the way you do? Why do you hold your body a certain way? If I were to ask you, what would you say? You might say, my neck was uncomfortable, so I wanted to hold it up. Or, I need to stretch. Or you'd pick something that people have known for a long time, that humans use their bodies as a way to communicate with each other. And yet, we don't teach that in school. We teach a lot of reading and writing and formal communication, but we teach almost no body communication. You just do it naturally. And it turns out that when any two people are interacting with each other, they typically negotiate a relative status. They do what's called status moves. Their relative status is embodied in whether they have a wide stance or a closed one, whether they look direct or look away, and then who sets the pace, who sets the rhythm of a conversation, or if they're walking together, who sets that pace. We know of a lot of these cues. We can watch a video and tell reliably who is higher status than the other. And it's not a fight. They mutually agree on this status. They together agree on a relative status. And if they don't, it's a very visibly awkward conversation. A natural, smooth conversation is one where they do agree on their relative status and act it out. But most people, if you ask them, you and your friend talking together, who's higher status, they would deny that makes sense. They would deny that either of them is higher status. They would say, of course, we're just equals talking together here, and they're not. So people are in denial a bit about their body language. Similarly with flirting, as you may know, people often flirt with others and deny it if you ask. They have other excuses for they were just being friendly, they just like the person, etc. But they do, in fact, flirt. So part of what's going on here is we have these other functions of this behavior, and we don't want to admit that we are agreeing to relative status or that we're flirting. Conversation. We talk to each other, sometimes about very practical things, like ordering a pizza or asking someone to hold the door. But a lot of our conversation is impractical. We are talking about various random, unimportant things. Why do we do that? We spend a lot of time doing that. If you ask people why do they spend time in this sort of conversation, they will usually, at best, point to something like sharing information. They will say, well, if we talk, and I know things they don't, and they know things I don't, then we can together know more at the end of the conversation than we did at the beginning. We are sharing information. That's a plausible theory of what you might be doing, but it doesn't fit a number of the key details of ordinary conversation behavior. You don't say, I've told you 3 useful things so far, it's your turn. We are more eager to talk than we are to listen. We don't talk about the most important, valuable pieces of information we might give each other. We talk about relatively trivial things, and we seem to follow this norm of not trying to force the conversation to change very much. If it changes, it has to change naturally along some natural conversation arc. These features make more sense if what's going on in conversation is that we each have a mental backpack of tools and resources. And we are playing the game where wherever the conversation goes, you're supposed to find something in that backpack to show off. To show that any time something would come up, you would have something useful and interesting to say. A person like that is a useful person to have around because they will always have useful tools and resources. So by playing that game, we show that we have this useful backpack of tools and resources. But of course, at the expense of not actually talking about important things in the actual conversations. This is not just true of our ordinary person conversations. Our media and academic conversations seem pretty similar. That is, in the mass media and in academic journals, we also don't talk about the most important things. We talk about whatever everybody else is talking about lately, and you're not supposed to just change the topic because you think something's important. And people seem to be much less interested in getting information than in projecting themselves out there, and they mainly seem to focus on showing off, especially in academia. I can tell you, when a journal referee reviews a paper, they hardly ever ask, is this useful for the world? They almost always do ask, is this impressive? If it's not impressive, it doesn't matter how useful it is, it gets rejected. So our larger conversations also suffer from this key feature that we do show off. So I would say academia is largely a social institution whose function is to credential people as being impressive. So you can trust that, in fact, somebody who has an impressive degree from an impressive institution is impressive. They are articulate, they are smart, they are able to do things most people can't. You can't necessarily trust them to be useful or even telling the truth, because that's not a high priority, unfortunately.
Is this true with antisocial people? Like you stick to the topic?
So by the way, I am okay with taking questions during the conversation, although I may put them off as well, if I think they'd go better later. We all vary in these things, but we are all very, antisocial people are very social. They are just focused on showing their defiance and independence more than their conformity and allegiance. That's a very social thing to do. It means you are a social creature who's focused on a social world. It's a different social strategy, but it's social. Consumption. As you all well know, we fill our lives with stuff we buy. We buy clothes and cars and vacations and buildings. And as you also probably know, if I pick any one thing you bought, such as that phone, and say, why did you buy that phone? You will typically point to features. Price, battery life, screen size, reliability. That's your rationale for most of the things you buy. But you also are quite well aware that in the aggregate, people pay a lot of attention when they buy things to how it will make them look. They are aware of which brands of phones are fashionable, or which brands of cars are impressive, and they buy and show things with an eye to showing off in those ways. This helps us understand, say, some of the features of our advertising world. We often see products advertised, such as in this picture here, where the product ad says very little about the price, quality, or features of the product. This is a beach, which is a beer associated with the beach. What's the point there? Well, the idea is that we use our products and experiences that we buy to project an image of ourselves to the people around us. We want to be seen as certain kind of people. And products, together with advertising, expand the language of what we can say. So once many people have seen this ad, you can hold up this beer and implicitly say, I'm a beach person. And they will understand you. And they may even accept your claim. if you will package it with other beach-like products and services. So advertising together with products allows us to say many more things about who we are. And this is why we want advertising that many people see. So as you might notice, expensive Rolex watch ads are shown to people who couldn't possibly afford the Rolex watch. Why? Well, there's no point in owning one if lots of other people aren't jealous. And how can they be jealous if they don't know about it? Advertising at major sporting events or other things that lots of people see pay more per person who views it, because there's a common knowledge effect. We want many people to have seen the ad, then it becomes more effective as a way we project our values. So some people have said it's something like, well, we're just stupid inside, and anytime they show a product, we just say, oh, I want that. But it makes more sense to say, I want a product if I know many other people will reliably interpret what I'm saying with the product, which happens if many other people have seen the ad. And of course, we use products not just to say I'm a beach person. We use things to say I'm eco-friendly, I'm reliable, etc. If you look at many kinds of products and services you buy, you see they often come with these auras of the kind of person you are if you use that product. Which is perfectly reasonable. It's just we don't admit it. We don't say that's what we're doing. We talk about the battery life and screen size, etc. Art. Why do we like art? If you ask someone why they like art, the usual reason they will give you is the experience the art produces. You stare at the painting and it does something to you. You listen to the music and it does something to you. You have experienced something in the process of the art. Now, there's a lot of features of art that don't make as much sense from that point of view. For example, before the introduction of photography, there was a high demand for very realistic-looking paintings. And with photography, all of a sudden, people didn't want realistic-looking paintings. Or, in the United States, a century and a half ago, in prisons, they had rules that you weren't allowed to serve prisoners lobster more than 2 days a week. Otherwise, that was cruel. Because lobster was a very cheap, widely available food in that area. Today, lobster is a luxury. You wouldn't imagine a rule that says you can't feed people too much lobster. But it's the same food. It hasn't changed. If the Mona Lisa were to burn to ash, most people say they would rather go see a pile of the ash than to see a perfect reproduction. We could fill most museums around the world with perfect reproductions of the best works of art in the world, but we don't. You want to go see the original. And in fact, people are more impressed by a piece of work if they know it was only done by one person, and they like art more if they know it was only done by one person rather than a committee, even though it's the same art. And they also like art better when it has more difficult materials, more difficult methods. But these don't have anything to do with the experience that's produced by the art. So more plausibly, what's going on is that artists are trying to be impressive and wanting to be impressive through their art, and others want to be impressive in terms of being able to discern good art, to be able to show that they can tell the difference, and to have a connection to the artist. We want to associate with impressive artists. These make sense of the patterns of activity with art, that we show off abilities to create, to discern, and to connect. But that's not what we say when we talk about art. When we talk about art, we talk about the experience, which is there, no doubt, but it's not the full story. Charity. Why do we help with money and time? Well, the answer is right there the way I said it. We say we do it to help. But there are a number of features of the way we help that don't make as much sense from the point of view of the simple theory that we're trying to help. We tend to give and help a wide variety of causes, whereas if we were trying to help the most, we would focus on the one most effective thing we could find and do that with all of our effort. We prefer to help people around us that we can see rather than people far away. We respond to requests to help when we're having a mating motive. There are ways we could help that would be especially effective that we don't do that aren't as visible to people, like what's something called marginal charity, where you move your private actions a little bit to help the world in a way that doesn't cost you very much, or giving to the far future, who you can use the compound interest to be very helpful to the far future, and much more than you can to people today. What seems to be going on is that people actually don't trust and like so much people who calculate the very best charity they could give for the world. That's too calculating. We instead like people who emotionally respond to seeing people in need. We admire and like people who have this basic emotional response, which isn't very calculating or thoughtful, but they just give when they see something in need around them. And that's plausibly because the people around you really want to know that you would help them if they were in trouble. Your figuring out that the best person to help in the world is somebody in Africa doesn't reassure them very much. They're not going to be that most in need person. But they might be able to put their face in front of yours and say, please help me. And then they would like to know that you're the sort of softie who might do that. Which is why we like that sort of emotional, not calculating attitude toward charity. Which is fine, except we don't admit to that, what we're doing. This chapter is based on a book that my colleague Brian Kaplan wrote called The Case Against Education, an excellent book. The chapter just summarizes that. Why do we go to school? What's the point? If you look at a graduation speech ceremony or at a letter of application or even just what people are doing, it looks like the point of school is to learn the material. There are classes, they have syllabi, they have lectures, they have books. It all looks like it's structured around material you are to learn, and the point of going to school is to learn that material. And as you know, people who get more school do get better jobs, etc. And so the claim is you learn more useful things by going to school. But as you may know, most people don't remember very much of what they learned in school. And the few things they remember aren't very useful. Most people who've been out of school for a few years know this fact. And it turns out, if you just want to learn, you can go to the very best schools and get the very best education for free if you'll just skip the credential. For example, when I lived near Stanford University and worked at NASA, I would just go sit on classes at Stanford. I wouldn't register. I would just sit and do them. And in fact, one teacher gave me a letter of recommendation based on my performance in his class that I never signed up for. But almost no one does that. Why? Plausibly because they'd rather get the credential than get the learning, which suggests that they aren't really there for the learning. Statistics suggest that for every year you have more of high school or college, you earn more money, but the last year is worth 3 times as much as the other years. But you don't learn 3 times as much in the last year of high school or college, so you're getting a premium for finishing. People who get college degrees are paid more even when they do irrelevant things like bartending. They still get paid more as a college-educated bartender. And education researchers have, for many decades, have studied and found ways we could help people learn more material faster, and the world's been largely uninterested in those. We have just not adopted the things the education researchers have come up with. People don't care. Why do we go to school then? A standard and roughly right explanation is that we show off how smart, conscientious, conformist, etc. we are. We also go to school to make friends and lovers. We indoctrinate ourselves in our society's habits and styles. These all make sense, but they aren't what we say when we talk about going to school. Medicine. This may be the most surprising to some of you. It is in the US where medicine is relatively sacred. Why do you go to the doctor or the hospital? The obvious explanation people will give you is to get well. You can get sick. Those people know a lot and have expensive ways to help you get well, and so you go there so they can help you get well. A plausible story. It's a story in people's heads, but it's not very accurate. In fact, we have regional variation where we look at regions and cities or even nations that spend more on medicine, and when you control for other things, those places are not healthier. We also have randomized experiments where some people were given randomly a low price for medicine, i.e. free, and other people had to pay basically full price. And the people who got it for free took more of it, more visits, more treatments, more drugs, more surgeries. And those people were not healthier. There is very little connection between health and medicine, which is surprising because there are many other things that we see much stronger, clearer correlations with health. Exercise, air quality, sleep, diet. We know of many things for which there are strong correlations and presumably causal relations with health, but there's very little interest in those things. I've taught health economics for many years. Students are not as interested in that as medicine. Similarly, when politicians stump and say they'll do something about health, it's almost always about medicine. They're not telling you they're going to do something about sleep or exercise. Nobody ever stumps about that.
Do you mean like a personal interest or interest of some politics or regulations?
I mean that when a politician takes a position and bothers to say something, they are almost always talking about medicine.
Right, but personally, I care more about it, diet and lifestyle.
So you may care about those things, but when we talk together, we talk about medicine. What's going on here? So our explanation is that it's like a parent kissing a kid's boo-boo when they scrape their knee. It's not medically effective, but it makes you feel cared for and attended. So think about Valentine's chocolate. On Valentine's, there's a tradition of giving your lover chocolate to show that you care. When you do this, you ask, how many chocolates should I buy? You don't ask then, how hungry are they? You don't try to match the amount of chocolate to the degree of their hunger. You instead buy an amount of chocolate that would show that you care a lot, even if that doesn't match their hunger. You're more focused on using the spending to show you care than the effectiveness of the chocolate. If you choose a quality of chocolate, you don't care very much about your private opinion about that chocolate quality or their private opinion. They don't care much. When they're judging whether it's a generous gift, they use the commonly perceived chocolate quality as the way to judge whether it was a good gift. Gifts, we don't care much about private signals about quality. And if you did not have someone to give you chocolate on Valentine's, you might buy one yourself and leave it on the desk at work. Because you'd like to be seen as the sort of person who's cared for, who gets the same sort of care everybody else gets, who is also cared for. In medicine, the idea is we are using medicine to show that we care about our family, about our employees, about our nation. And in that, we spend enough to show that we care a lot, even past the point that it's effective. So most marginal medicine isn't very useful, but we're spending to show that we care. And we are not very interested in private information about the quality of medicine. So a famous study had people about to undergo heart surgery where they faced a maybe 1% or so risk of dying. And they were offered information about which surgeons or hospitals in their area had which death rates from doing that surgery. If they valued their life at $1 million, then this information might be worth $10,000 to find out who had the higher death rates. But only 8% were willing to pay $50 to find this out. And when you gave the information to people, they just wouldn't use it or listen to it. People are very uninterested in private information about the quality of medicine, although they're very responsive to hearing in the newspaper that some hospital had some adverse event. If everybody else hears about it, then they respond a lot to rumors of something that went wrong. That's shared information, not private information. So again, it's reasonable and even admirable for us to show that we care about each other, to come to the hospital and visit, to bring your sick neighbors some food. Those are all very nice things to do, but we are not admitting that's what we're mainly doing with medicine. We pretend we're doing something else, and that's part of the puzzle. Second to last one here, religion. Why are we religious? Those of us who are. If you pick someone who's religious and you ask them, why are you religious? They will tell you it's because they have beliefs, special beliefs. They believe a document, they believe a sermon, they believe some story about the nature of the universe, the existence of a God, punishment or reward for various kinds of behavior. They believe these things. And these beliefs then lead them to pay large costs. Religious people spend a lot of time, they give up foods, they give up behaviors, they sacrifice in many ways for these beliefs. And of course, as we know, religious beliefs are somewhat famously kind of hard to believe. They are often fantastical things that evidence is weak on. And yet people are especially eager to believe these things.
You can call like vegetarian or religious?
You could, sure. I'm not that picky about the definition of religion here. Many other things will have similarities. Ideologies will have similarities with religions. The key point is, you have these beliefs. They're kind of distant from your immediate experience. They are something you share with a group, and you pay large costs to have them. And it would, if some people were just prone to pick strange beliefs in strange groups, you'd expect those people to, on average, suffer because of that. But in fact, religious people consistently win by most social winning metrics. They live longer, they have better jobs, more income, happier families, less divorce, more married, more friends. Everything you might want in life, religious people have more of it. How is it they're so consistently winning? By adopting strange beliefs and paying large costs to support them. The standard answer in social science, not our answer per se, is that religion bonds groups together. By being willing to pay these costs and adopt strange beliefs, they show that they are willing to pay costs to be part of their group. And religions and groups that ask more of people in terms of these sort of sacrifices, they do in fact bond more and rely more on each other in bad times. If times are difficult, you can in fact go to your co-religion people and ask for help more than you can go to other people. So religion functions there, but again, it's not what we say when we're talking about religion. Why not just say, yes, I'm in this group to sacrifice to bond with you guys so you guys will help me if we're in trouble? No, that's not what you say. Lastly, politics. Why are we political? We are political not just by voting, but by reading, by talking, by protesting, by advocating, and of course by the most effective form, Facebook feeds. Why? Why do all that stuff? Well, if you ask people why they're doing it, the most obvious answer you'll get for them is to help. The world isn't a perfect place. Many political choices and policies aren't ideal, and they are there to help fix that. They are there to make the world better by pushing for better policies. That will be the standard answer. They are a do-right, a do-gooder. They are there to help. But this explanation doesn't fit a lot of particular details for people's political behavior. So people are remarkably uninformed about their political opinions. In fact, you ask them the same political question today and 6 months later, they will typically give you different answers because they just made it up. People are very emotional and committed to what these random answers they make up. They're remarkably gullible in accepting pretty weak arguments that they wouldn't accept in other contexts. People are remarkably insensitive to whether their vote matters in deciding when to vote. They like politicians who take positions that agree with theirs, even when those positions aren't effective. So US voters say want the president to share their education opinions with them, even though the US president can't do much about education. We don't give politicians much reward for being good at working behind the scenes or good at compromise. In fact, most people, if you ask them, if you ask them about their political views, they're very happy to tell you about the ideal world that they would choose if they were king, and they're very reluctant to tell you about what compromises they would make with people who have different views. But in fact, most real politics is all about compromise. Compromises is what make things happen, and yet people show very little interest in that, and they don't want to hear from their politicians either what compromises they would make. They want them to be strong and take one side. Now, people do seem to care a lot about the people around them and what political opinions they have. People care about the political opinions of their lovers or spouses, about their children, about their children's spouses. They care if they were offered the ability to choose who wins a scholarship, they would choose someone who agrees with their political views. People care a lot about associating with people who share their political views. And that's a real strong incentive. That's an incentive that will drive their behavior. And that's the basis of our saying a better explanation for most human political behavior is, instead of being do-rights, they are apparatchiks, which you might recall as the word for the old Soviet political operator, someone who paid very close attention to the political winds and was very careful to be loyal to the party. So there's an old story of a room full of people back when Stalin was ruler, and the name Stalin came up in the room. He wasn't there, but everybody wanted to show their support by Stalin by standing up and clapping. And they did. And they kept clapping for 10 minutes. And near the end of that, people are wondering, well, isn't it time to stop? But I don't want to be the first person to stop, because then otherwise I will look disloyal. So eventually, somebody was the first person to stop, and then that person went to Siberia that night, because they were interpreted as being the most disloyal in the room. Though our environments aren't that harsh, but they're relatively harsh. If people won't hire you for a job or be your lover if you don't share their political views, those are pretty strong incentives to have political views. They aren't incentives to have views that produce policy that works. They're incentives to have political views that other people around you see as loyal to them. And that makes sense for people to do. It might not make sense for us to build the political institutions around that sort of behavior, but it makes sense for people to act that way in politics. But it's not what people will say when they're talking about these things. So we've just gone over 10 chapters. And in many of these, I mentioned the puzzle. These are all reasonable things to do. Why don't we know that this is what we're doing? Why don't we admit to this, what we're doing? Okay, so now we have to step back and do a little evolutionary psychology and say, a key feature of humans compared to other animals was we had social norms. We had language and we had weapons, and that allowed us to make rules like nobody hits anybody on purpose, and use those rules to keep the peace. So the norm was, not only shouldn't you hit somebody on purpose, but if you see someone do it, you need to tell other people and then coordinate with them to find out what to do. And they had escalating punishments. First they'll tell you, then they'll shame you, then they'll not associate with you, maybe they'll leave camp in the middle of the night, and if worse comes to worse, they'll kill you. But that was the way humans left for a long time. And many of these norms are expressed in terms of motives, like you can't do it on purpose. So humans were very attentive to whether they were violating norms and what sort of story they could tell at any one moment about their behavior in terms of their motives. In fact, it's so much that your brain, your conscious mind, is not plausibly so much your king or president of your mind. Your conscious mind is the press secretary. Its whole job is to watch what you're doing and come up with explanations for what you're doing that protect you from being accused of norm violations. Which is why you aren't actually aware of your real motivations. You're aware of the best story you can come up with to explain your actions. That's why you aren't aware of your actual motives, because your actual motives are more often things that you could be accused of being wrong. So for example, many of these are showing off, and showing off is just a no-no. Bragging is a no-no among foragers. They're fiercely egalitarian, they're supposed to share, supposed to make communal decisions, nobody hits anybody or uses force, and they don't brag and they don't even create subgroup coalitions. These are all things that they weren't supposed to do. Of course they did them, but they did them on the sly, slightly out of view of the norm enforcement, and they were very worried that they'd get caught, and so they were constantly trying to make sure they had a story to defend themselves, to explain what they were doing and why, which is why you don't know your actual motives. You know the best story that will protect you from these accusations. So this creates a change from the policy point of view and what the policy problem is. So I would say previously, most people think of the policy problem as, what do people want and how do we design policy to give them more of what they want? They want to be healthy, they want to learn things, whatever it is. How can we reform policy to give them this thing they want? Now we realize that the thing they say they want isn't the same thing as the thing they actually want. So that makes the policy reform problem substantially harder. Now we have to find a new reform that will let them continue to pretend to want the thing they pretend to want, but now give them more of the thing they actually want. If you can do that, you have a better chance of getting people to actually want it, because you're giving something they actually want. It's a harder design problem, but we have more chance of success if we can solve it. We have a better chance of actually getting people something they're willing to back up. So for example, in education, you might say, well, people want to show off in school. What sort of ability could they show off on that schools today don't show off very well? So for example, maybe people who are good thinking on their feet, i.e. in flexible conversation. They can talk and argue. Schools don't do a very good job of showing that today because most schoolwork is written schoolwork. But if you could make a school that was designed around showing off that feature, then people might be interested in it because it was giving them what they really want, which is to show off more ways that they have today. Finally, who should know this? So think this through. Evolution decided that it was better off that you not know the stuff I've been telling you. Is it right? Well, probably it is if your environment is like the environment evolution was designing you for. The question is, how different is your environment from that? It might be different because the world's changed, but it might be different because your job makes it especially important. You might be a manager, a salesperson, for whom it's especially important to figure out people's motives and deal with them. You might be, like me, someone who's nerdy, whose inherited instincts aren't very useful, aren't very good. So we might be better off thinking things through consciously because if we just let our instincts tell us what to do, it doesn't work so well. Or you might be a policy analyst. And so I especially think somebody who would present themselves to the world as someone who understands the social world well enough to make suggestions about how we should change social institutions. It should be on a person like that to actually know what's going on. And finally, I've gone over these 10 areas, but quite plausibly, there are many more that we didn't go over. Perhaps these next 10. Plausibly, you could go study a lot of other areas of life and find out what the hidden motives actually are going on in other areas of life. And we hope that somebody will follow this lead to continue to do that, although we haven't seen that much interest. And that's the end of my talk.